All right, we are right at the top of the hour, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jessica Duncan, VP of National Accounts here at Lighthouse AI, a pharma solutions company. We welcome you to today's webinar, where we are going to discuss compliance requirements for business changes and how to efficiently and accurately execute these crucial projects. We're delighted to have you join us today, but before we dive into the main content, we'd like to provide you with some additional information just to ensure that you have a smooth and enjoyable webinar experience. First, please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on demand at a later date. You will receive an email notification link to access the recording at that time. By default, all attendees' audio and video are muted to minimize background noise and distractions. The chat function will also be disabled for today's webinar. However, you can submit your questions at any time via the Q&A feature, which can be found at the bottom of the Zoom window. Our team will address your questions during the designated Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. Once again, we thank you for joining us today, and we hope that you enjoy the webinar and find the information valuable. And now we're going to introduce today's speakers. We have Kelly DiBattista, Esquire, Lighthouse AI's Director of Research. Kelly is an admitted attorney in New York and brings 8 years of pharmaceutical regulatory and compliance research and industry experience. Kelly recently crossed over from Pharma Solutions to Lighthouse AI in order to assist in product development. Presenting with Kelly today is Jennifer Falkenroth. Jennifer is a senior research associate at Lighthouse AI. Previous to this role, she was a bureau manager with Utah's Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing, overseeing 9 professional licensing boards, including the Board of Pharmacy. Not only did Jennifer regulate the pharmacy field, but she also practiced in it as well, as she has been a licensed pharmacy technician since 2005. And we also have Adam Morano, VP of Product Management, joining us today. Adam has 35 years of experience in enterprise software solutions and will be presenting our Lighthouse AI software solution at the end of today's webinar. To that end, we have a couple of disclaimers. First and foremost, Lighthouse AI is not a law firm. The information provided herein is not intended to create, and receipt of it does not create, a lawyer-client relationship. The information provided is subject to change and is intended for use as informative industry knowledge. Secondly, because we have such a variety of participants, Lighthouse AI asks that each of us remember the United States and other government antitrust laws, which are designed to prevent competitors from colluding or appearing to collude on practices that affect prices, fees, or ability of others to compete. Lighthouse AI asks that any client during any meeting involving competitors to refrain from any discussion or any other actions that could have anti-competitive effect. If at any point you feel that a discussion has drifted into inappropriate areas, you should bring it to the attention of the person chairing the meeting. If the discussion continues, you should remove yourself from that meeting and ask that the minutes reflect that. All right, let's get started with today's webinar. Over to you, Kelly.
Thanks, Jess. Welcome, everyone. This is a deep dive into business changes. Business changes can be a daunting experience for a lot of companies, depending on the change that's taking place. It could be a more difficult change or something as simple as just notifying a board in writing. So these are just some examples of the major changes that companies go through. Change of ownership is easily the most demanding of the changes. It almost always requires a new application. It might almost always end up with a new license number. In some cases not, but adhering to board submission timeframes is really important for a number of reasons with change of ownership, and we'll touch on that shortly. Another change is a change of designated representative. In certain states, the window to actually make that change is a very small one. In 2 states in particular, a certified designated rep is required. So that's California and Florida. Along with that comes fingerprints, an exam, individual fees, a separate application. So that in and of itself is a really time-consuming process. So you're kind of up against the wall there with obtaining a new certified designated rep in the time frame allocated by the board. A change of a pharmacist in charge, similar timeframes to the change of DR. There's additional requirements like an inventory must be taken by the outgoing pick, another inventory by the incoming pick. Some states also require the pick to have a non-resident pharmacist license. One example of that is Alabama. So that's additional time-consuming tasks that have to be accounted for when you're looking at short windows, such as 30 days or less. Adding a DBA to a business name is sometimes treated as a name change, so that can trigger a new application requirement as well, depending on the state. A change of physical address in the home state, that requires usually a home state inspection to be updated and sent to all your non-resident states. And then, as we mentioned, change of name can require a whole new application. Less involved are the change of mailing address and change of officer. Usually that's just a simple form or a written notification to the board. So the first one we're going to talk about is change of ownership. As I mentioned, one of the most challenging changes a business can undergo. Timing is huge. Some states require pre-close submission of applications, and some require pre-close notification. The most common window is, I want to say, within 30 days of the change actually taking place. But some states want to be notified in advance and the app submitted after the change. Some want the app submitted prior to the change, but supporting documentation to follow. So it really varies as far as timing and what the state wants. Some states have additional requirements, additional attachments outside of the norm for a new app. Florida wants to see a bill of sale in the event of a change of ownership. Other states want organizational charts. California has a number of documents that they require in a change of ownership, which we'll touch on later today. And then probably the most concerning for a number of businesses is disruption in operations. Some states allow operations to continue as long as you have an operating agreement. Arizona is an example, or a power of attorney. Oklahoma is an example. That way the buyer can use the existing license to continue operations while the new license is pending before the board. There are some states who are a lot stricter about that, and they say the license is inactive as soon as the change takes place, which makes adhering to timeframes all the more important. And then lastly, we have potential delays. New applications due to a change require a lot of information regarding the new owners. They want to know about disciplinary actions, fingerprints have to be done, background checks. New York in particular requires the name and title for each officer, partner, member, or owner. Some boards want social security numbers of owners and officers. So you're relying on a number of people to provide really personal information in a timely manner who might not all be in one place. That could be a really difficult and time-consuming task to gather. Now, we talked about continuation of operations as being a huge pain point for companies. Nobody wants to have to stop operating in a given state due to a change. So it's always a concern when a change project comes up. Some states, as I mentioned, don't offer any flexibility. So you really have to be on top of their timeframes. Adding another layer of complexity to this is it's very rarely clear in the statutes, the regulations on the state website, whether or not continuing operations under an existing license is even permitted. So that means you have to obtain written confirmation from a number of boards, which is another time-consuming task. California and Florida, they do offer the option for a temporary license in order to avoid disruption. But, for example, in California, there's an additional non-refundable fee. It's over $700. And if you're changing anything other than your location or ownership, you have to send a letter stating why it's in the best interest of the public for them to even grant you that temporary license. We mentioned the operating agreement and power of attorney in some states who allow that. Another example of a flexible state is New Jersey. New Jersey allows you to send a cover letter. You have to indicate who the parties are to the change taking place, the selling party's registration number, and the closing date. And you also have to confirm that there's nothing changing as far as personnel and nothing changing as far as operations in the facility. And in addition to that letter, a new application is also required. The actual change applications are super time consuming. All your non-resident states, as we mentioned, are going to want to see an updated home state license in order for those to even be fully processed. That usually doesn't happen until after the close. So timing, it really is key here. It's the number one step to get started in your home state as soon as possible. Just really get all your ducks in a row. And not all states require pre-change notice, but it is best practices to give the boards a heads up as far as what's going on. And especially in the event of a complicated change, it's always a good idea to send a cover letter describing the details to the board, what's happening with both parties. Not everything's a straightforward change of ownership. or other change. So I learned in my experience that the boards appreciate context and explanation.
Having a plan of action for when a PIC or DR goes on extended leave, and by DR I mean designated rep. So when they leave, they quit or they pass away, it's vital to keep operations running smoothly. Iowa has an interim pharmacist application for when a pharmacist goes on FMLA or an extended break. California will permit an interim PIC for up to 120 days. But remember, you need to notify the boards by submitting an application if they offer it. A designated rep in Florida may take an authorized absence, which is defined in the regulations. This is where the designated rep may have a physical absence for a cumulative 60 calendar days in any 365 calendar day period. Keep in mind that if your facility has a designated rep or PIC that has left the company, that person is responsible for reporting it to the board for themselves. The company must report it on the company's behalf. However, if the company has not reported it within the correct time frame, for example, Florida only has 10 days, the facility can be subject to disciplinary action. Many states have temporary pharmacist licensure to cover until a full-time pharmacist is hired. If the state that you're licensed in has not created a temporary or interim license, typically you'll have to go through the full PIC or designated rep application process, which may include fingerprints and fees, even if it's only for 1 or 2 months until you have found a permanent PIC or designated rep. States like Nevada that require non-resident pharmacist in charge or PIC licenses, which means if your home state is Wyoming and your pharmacy is licensed in Nevada, your PIC must hold a Nevada pharmacist license. Around, I think, 19 states that require a non-resident pharmacist license. So it's important to keep in mind the timeframes when submitting the application for a new PIC or designated rep. You may have to send fingerprints and have a board interview prior to the license being issued. As Kelly mentioned, you might have to submit an inventory for the outcoming and incoming PIC. And now some states are even requiring a self-inspection with the PIC change. So just look for that. California does permit a backup designated rep, which is helpful if you need to replace your designated rep quickly. You have that backup that's already there and they're qualified. Florida permits more than one designated rep if there is shift work. But remember, if you have more than one DR and the DR listed on the application leaves, you must notify the board of who the new designated rep is. The board must always have a designated rep on file.
So there are, as we touched on, some attachments specific to changes, mainly change of ownership that the boards want to see. They won't process your application without them. California, I mentioned, had a number of attachments that are required. So they want a seller's certification, a copy of the proposed purchase agreement, a copy of the final sale closing document, and an organizational chart. It's more common than not that the states want to see something, I guess, displaying what the differences are pre and post change. South Carolina is an example of that. They want a pre and post change organizational chart. So those are additional attachments and requirements that you have to keep in mind. Often don't pop up until the change actually takes place. So you might submit pre-closing, but you have to continuously submit attachments in order to have the application fully processed. Another big point is that the differences across the states when it comes to changes, especially change of ownership, they really vary extremely. Some states are more lenient, like North Carolina. They give you up to 90 days after the change to submit. And then you have the stricter states that want, submission 15 days prior or within 10 days, or they just say ASAP. There are different concerns regarding what level of the company is changing. So that's, your grandparent change, your parent change versus your direct licensee. Some states only require a new app if it's at the parent level or below. Some want written notification if it's grandparent, but an app if it's parent. And some only want an application if it's the direct licensee. So that is within the definition of what constitutes a change of ownership in the various states. But again, inconsistencies all over the place. And off of that, some will only consider a change of ownership if it's 51% or more changing. Some say 10%. Some only if the EIN is changing for the company. Otherwise, they just want, notification. So the distinctions are all over the place. Another one is entity type changes. If it's an LLC changing to a corporation, not all states consider that a change of ownership. Some do. So again, all over the place there. Now, timing is a topic, hugely important topic when it comes to changes. The length of how long it takes to gather all the documentation and time for this sort of submission, pre-file states are 30 days to 60 days prior. If your home states, that can vary too. If it's a home state submission, sometimes they want it prior if it's the home state, and after if it's non-resident state. And then some of your, your average states are Ohio and Oklahoma that are in that 30-day time period, which I think is more often than not the time period that the states go with. So the investment and the time it takes into researching all of these changes, I used to do this, manually on a regular basis, and tracking down how a change is even defined with all the nuances in a state, and where and when a new app is even required, versus simply a notification, can take anywhere from 2 weeks to a month, depending on the complexity of the change. And then confirming which ones want what, depending on the time frame they want to see it in, is a very time-intensive process to research. Some states have really ambiguous language with how they define change of ownership. Some just say anything that's changed on their initial application that was received, they want a new one submitted. So really, keeping an outline of who wants what, when, and why, it can get really complicated, especially trying to determine whether or not the change that you're going through as a company is even considered a change of ownership or even requires a new app. Application fees are often non-refundable. So really narrowing down what's required and when, it's really important for a business. Over to you, Jen.
Thanks. I'm going to talk about compliance risk. If you ever have, or if you plan on a change project in the future internally, you will need to invest time, money, and resources in things like finding out where your officers, DR, or PIC can get fingerprinted or complete a background check, getting a foreign qualification or a registered agent in another state if it's required, gathering a list with license numbers, employee list, SOPs, inspection, and any deficiency notices or disciplinary actions if they're applicable. It can be a lot of work finding out even just the change application requirements for each state. And if you're going to do it externally, hiring a third-party law firm or consulting agency can be costly for just a one-time change projects. Most companies go through several change projects. If there is a mistake or if you fail to get requested information to the board on time, your company risks getting a license denial. And then you have to start all over with the whole process and resubmit fees. And let's not forget that you need to be constantly on the watch for changing regulations that affect your company and your license. So boards expect you, the licensee, to know the regulations of your license. And as a licensee, you affirm that when you apply. If you look at any application that you have filled out or are planning on filling out for a pharmacy manufacturer distributor permit, before you sign as the applicant, there is usually always a phrase that is something like, I affirm or attest that there will be compliance with the Pharmacy Practice Act and rules and all other applicable statutes and rules. Bottom line is, it is up to the licensee to ensure that they are compliant with all licensure requirements for the license they hold, and overlooking a requirement or late submission can be costly. Next slide. So penalties can range from a fine, public reprimand, or even probationary terms. It has been noted that Arkansas has fined up to $10,000 for a late change of ownership notification. Delayed reporting or not reporting may result in the delay of the issuance of a new license, potential for a cease and desist of all operations, and include an appearance before the board with a corrective action plan. After the issue is resolved in one state, it must be reported to the other states the company is licensed in. Some states require immediate notification, others want it reported at renewal. So it could be up to 2 years of reporting the original discipline, and this could just go on for years. Unprofessional conduct in one state that you're licensed in is typically unprofessional conduct in another state you're licensed in. So generally, it is quite easy for those other states to take a reciprocal action on the originating action. Not all states do, but they can. And next slide. So in addition to receiving disciplinary action and large fines from state boards, your company will have the discipline attached to their license with the state board that issued it. With the exception of letters of concern or warnings, discipline is generally public information and is also listed on state board websites for the public to view. I have noticed that some states choose to place discipline in their state's quarterly NABP national newsletter, or they post information where you can locate disciplinary information on their website. In Utah, discipline is on the state website for 10 years. And then on future applications, they ask, has your facility had disciplinary action taken against it or had a license denied? And if you had, you'll have to answer yes and provide copies of all the disciplinary actions from each state that discipline the company. And there are also the other items listed on this slide to consider. I'm going to pass it back over to you, Kelly.
Thanks, Jen. So there's a lot of best practices that we went over, you know, especially knowing your timeframes in a state. That's huge. It's usually in the statutes and the regulations, but there are, you know, some states where in practice they do things a certain way or they want things a certain way. So between confirming which states require pre-close submission or post-change notification is key. Additionally, gathering all the sensitive information from the appropriate people is another arduous task. People are reluctant to provide social security numbers and other personal information, but it is required in order to get licensed or required on a change of ownership application. So these are things that if you're aware of them at the outset, you're setting yourself up for a much more seamless change process, especially change of ownership, which we mentioned can cause a disruption in operations for a business, and nobody wants that to happen. Additionally, home state is number one priority for a number of reasons. Not only are all of the other states going to want to see an updated home state license, but you'll likely need an updated inspection, all of the original attachments that went along with the initial license for the home state, which tend to be a little bit more, I guess, involved than if it's a non-resident state. In a lot of cases, there are different requirements depending on whether it's your resident or non-resident state. So keeping your home state number one priority will set you up for success everywhere else. And then early submissions, you know, the best way to stay compliant in this process is to just get ahead of, you know, what is the most, I guess, what is the worst time frame we're looking at here? Is it 90 days pre-close? You know, what is the worst case scenario? And if we can meet that, then we should be fine everywhere else. So keeping timeframes and requirements together and clear, considering how much they vary across all of the different states, will also set you up for success down the road. And then this is my personal, in my personal experience, I always recommend just give the board notice and context, especially if it's complex, especially if it's not a straightforward change of ownership, 100% sale. There's a lot of different changes that companies could undergo for various reasons. And they're not all straightforward for the board or, you know, easily understood by a board. So just giving them some idea of what's actually going on here, I think that's always appreciated. It's really just a simple cover letter, a simple explanation. Sometimes they'll want to see more information because of that, but just stay ahead of it. You know, more of a heads up is better than finding things out too late for a board. So at this point, I would like to turn it over to Adam Morano, our VP of Product Management. Adam is in charge of development of our Lighthouse Compliance Automation Suite, and we'd like to take a moment for him to show you how Lighthouse AI can assist you in completing these types of changes.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly and Jen. It just kind of kicked the demo off. I think Kelly and Jen did a really good job of explaining just how complex just this area of compliance can be. All of the work that needs to be done, all the data you need as a starting point can be very daunting just to gather all that data. Our job on the Lighthouse AI software front is really to simplify all of the daunting tasks that Jen and Kelly just went through. And that's what I'd like to demo today. So what I have up right now is just the homepage of our Lighthouse AI software solution. Real quick, we're going to be only touching really on a couple of sections in this quick demo related to the business changes that were discussed on the webinar. But two areas I'm going to hit on. One is we're going to start with what we call our intelligence module. This intelligence module, what problem does that solve that was just discussed? How do you find all of the data that's in play for a certain type of business change across all of the jurisdictions and only see the information that's relevant to your facility? From doing a number of demos, one of the biggest hassles I hear with customers is when they're manually doing this research, 80% of the data that they look at does not pertain to their facility. That's one of the advantages of using our software. We do all of that pre-filtering out that by the time you get the results for what you're looking for, it's centric to your facility. And I'll explain a little bit further how we do that. I'm going to real quick touch on the requirements management module as well, because knowing what you need to do is the start of the process. Once you know what you need to do, you need a management interface that will actually let you track your progress on filling out the applications and everything else that needs to be done to actually get that change done. Okay. So the process for business changes starts in our intelligence module, and you start with what we call configuration. Okay. Each of these configurations is done at a granularity of a facility level. So I'm going to pick our Farmer Enterprises company and client, and I'm going to use a Roswell, Georgia facility as an example. Okay. We offer multiple types of research in this area. Initials, which will help you find what your initial facility license need to be. We have a lot of automated help with renewals, but today we're talking about business changes. So I'm going to select business change. So I'm going to do let's do a physical address change for this wholesale facility in Roswell, Georgia. I click Start New. Okay. We've simplified getting the starting point answers that you're looking for down to as simple as saying, I'm doing a change of address, physical versus mailing. I think that was mentioned multiple times earlier. Change of ownership is a little more complex. We ask you a bit more questions because this is the level of detail we'd need to get for a change of owner to make sure we're getting you the right results for a particular jurisdiction. But for the demo, I'm going to keep it simple and do a change of mailing address. Okay. One of the key things to this is anybody who's using our system, we have what we call a facility profile built into the system. So when I click this next button right here, this is just a review page. When I click this submit configuration, what the system is now doing is saying, go into our database of all of the requirements, in this case, a change of physical mailing address requirement, and saying, based on the specific details of the profile that you've built for that facility, jurisdiction, are they virtual, are they physical, are they whatever? And we're finding all of the matches for all of the jurisdictions that you're doing business in or with, what's required to actually start the process, all the data you need to start the process to actually do a change of physical address. So it just completed. So if we pause right here and you think about how long that manual effort you could take, as Kelly said earlier, it can take a whole month. It might take 2 weeks if it's something simple, but all of that research to go out and validate. And I think everybody understands sometimes all of the logic or the wording on some of the board's websites can be a little bit fuzzy. We've already defuzzed, all of this. Our team who validates the data that we use to come up with these results, they've already called the Board of Pharmacy to get clarifications, and that's reflected in the results that you get. So a key I want you to understand here is imagine the time cost savings and being able to, when a business change comes up, being able to get your starting point in less than 30 seconds, as opposed to having multiple people go out, weed through all of that fuzzy data to get a level of confidence that you believe you have what to start with. So the job completed. In 30 seconds, what are we providing you? It's probably kind of what you'd expect if you think about how software would work for this. For every jurisdiction, right? For a change of physical address, what is the application that's required? Because you hold some type of usually state facility level license. Because you're a wholesale distributor in Alabama, you need this application. And then over to the right, we provide you with a lot of other information that's very useful for actually executing on this process of completing your change of physical address, okay? So what is it over to the right here? Best thing to do is probably just focus your eyes at the top up here, okay? And you'll see all of the additional information for each jurisdiction, for each application, what you're gonna need. An overview of what the process is. Is it just a flash notification or is there an actual application to fill out? The timeframes that Kelly talked about as being so important, so you can find, you know, what's that shortest time frame. You got to stay ahead of that. Budgeting perspectives, is there a fee associated with it? Are there additional attachments that have to go with this application? This is all of the manual information that your team would have to figure out. We're spoon feeding it to you, and we're only feeding you the information that is relevant to your facility and pre-filtering out all of that other data that's not pertinent to your facility. And then obviously over here at the end, if there is a form to fill out, we'll tell you where the online form is that you can cut and paste into a browser, or if it's an actual paper application, usually where you can go download the PDF. Okay, so again, real quick, if you think about the time and the money to go do this manually versus using our teams already done this research for you, and just say, click a button, 30 seconds later, here's the data you need to go perform that business change. Huge cost savings, in our opinion, staying ahead of any of the penalties and everything else. And to wrap it up, you know, a little bit right here, as I mentioned earlier, this is the starting point. This is what you need to do. The next thing that you get into is getting help managing actually doing this. And we've automated this system in such a way that once we have these types of results, what I can do is click the button up here. Once I select, I'm going to go ahead and just do a select all. And what I'm saying here is, now that I understand everything that I need to do, help me manage doing it, right? A lot of people are trying to plug this into a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets get messed up, whatever. With a couple clicks of a button here, I'm transitioning all of this knowledge on what's needed to perform this activity, and I've automatically transferred it over to the other module that I mentioned earlier, the requirements management module. So if we click over there real quick, we've done this transition between I know what's needed, help me manage doing it, okay? And this is the requirements list. I'm going to click into the activity grid right here. And these are all the activities that I'm currently managing for any requirement for a specific facility. I'm going to filter down to the Roswell facility because that's the one that we're using for this demo. And you can see here, I've got a number of different activities. I've got some renewals going on. Here's all those change of physical addresses. So if I run another quick filter here, all of these placeholders have now been created for me. For every change of application that I need to do, I have a way of managing my progress of getting that application done. Whether you're on our CAS program and we're helping you do that, or you decided to do it yourself. So not only do we let you see what activities are currently in play, that they're in progress of being worked, you'll notice they're all incomplete. We break this down and create a pseudo workflow level of tasks. So we actually automatically set up, you'll call it a task workflow, to help you get this change of physical address done for a specific jurisdiction because it's related to a specific requirement. Things like, you know, sign and submit it, fill out the data, you know, board pending, waiting for things to come back. But we actually create this task flow. And the way this works, as you work through these different tasks, which will be ordered by the end of their due date, as you set a due date, is all of these tasks become complete. When all the tasks are complete, the actual activity itself, in this case, a change of physical address, comes complete. So why are we building this software? We're trying to make this as painless as possible for you. Take out all of the mundane time and money you're spending doing that research, figuring out what data you're finding is valid and not valid. We've already done that. It's sitting here waiting for you to use. A few clicks of a button, you get all the data that's relevant to know what you need to do to do this type of a business change, transfer it over to the requirements management side, and then work through a process of making sure that all of the tasks that need to be completed for this activity is completed on time, and you're ready to go and you stay in compliance and avoid those types of penalties, fines, and everything else that goes. So software is great for doing things like this. When I talk again with a lot of customers, there's a whole bunch of other more important things that team could be spending their time on, rather than doing all of this mundane type of work that software is great at doing. And all of our data is backed by our research team with Kelly and Jen. Human review of all of this data is also done to make sure that when you get the results, you're getting the accuracy and the correct guidance as to what you need to do. And Kelly, I believe at this point it goes back to you. Is that correct? Or
Yes. Thank you, Adam. So Adam touched on all of these points with the software. You know, everything is vetted by a team of people. We're constantly checking the data, make sure it's up to date. If anything's changed, rules and regulations, new license requirements, new change requirements. You know, for example, Alaska just recently said, stop sending us applications for a change of ownership, just send us a notification. So all of that, we have a team of researchers keeping on top of the data and its relevancy, and making it the most up-to-date and freshest data possible. Okay, so we finished a little bit early, so we have a good amount of time for any questions that anybody might have. So we have several here. Okay, so the first one is, if we are publicly traded and cannot file ahead of the close, what should we do? Jess, do you mind taking that one?
Sure. So if you work for a company that's publicly traded, because of SEC rules, your company cannot pre-file. That change can't be disclosed to anyone before it actually takes effect. So all you really can do is as much research to prepare the documents and information in advance as you possibly can. Sometimes that's easier said than done, especially depending on how much information you actually have, because typically that information is kept at the tippy top, and you, if you're the person completing those applications or completing the research, may not have all of that information. So the best thing you can do is try to be as prepared as possible for the effective date so that you can go and file those applications as soon as possible, as soon as that change is effective.
Thanks, Jess. The next one we have is, would you mind touching on pre-file states again and their significance? So pre-file states are significant because, the earliest submission out of any of the states, you've got to get your application before the board, before the change even takes place. And if you don't, and you miss that window, that can disrupt operations. The board might say you can't continue operating under the existing license because now you're out of compliance due to missing our timeframes. And it also makes gathering all of that information in order to submit the application more pressing. You've got to do everything much sooner than you normally would if it was a 30-day after the change state, or even a 90-day after the change state. So you've really got to be on top of those timeframes in order to prevent any disruption in business. The next one we have is, you mentioned that the change projects can take up to 30 days or more to research all requirements. Can you provide some tips to help speed that up for someone who's doing a change project for the first time? Well, I think of a lot of what we touched on was, the research it's going to take to decipher whether or not your change is an application or simply a notification, the timeframes that vary, the pre-file states, for example, and then, use intelligence. I mean, it's really the best way to get all that information as quickly as possible and stay within that time frame that the board wants the information received within, as well as all the attachments that they're looking for in order to process the change completely. I am selling OTCs and dietary supplements as a private label distributor exclusively through Amazon. Do we need to look at all states or only states with an Amazon distribution center that I am shipping to? Well, that's a good question for our research team and intelligence. I'm not sure if I'm able to answer that right now live, but it would be a good idea to look at all states. Because there are a number of OTC states that do regulate over-the-counter drugs, and there are some requirements for dietary supplements as well, although they're typically more regulated as a food item. I'll give it a minute for a couple of other questions. Seems like that's all we've got currently. I don't know if anybody has anything else they want to add before we wrap. Nope. Okay. Well, it was great being able to tell you guys about change ofs, why they're a big deal, why they're so important for companies to stay on top of, and stay compliant. Jennifer went over the risks to being non-compliant and how that really has a snowball effect across all of the other states. It could disrupt operations. It could follow you for years. So knowing what to do, where, and when is of the utmost importance. And, we're here to do that for you. So thanks again, everybody. Glad you joined us, and look forward to the next webinar.